As you can see in the picture here, this is about your home and about your transportation. And that's what we're going to focus on today. And it's about families. It's about families, the health of families, and it's about family budgets. I'm a leadership, I'm trained leader in climate reality as well as a NEST member. Let's move ahead. So the agenda would be the emissions challenge that we face, solutions, priorities, incentives, and we'll talk about just the top ones, the ones that have the biggest bang for the emission effort. First of all, electricity, transportation, and then the home. And then we'll suggest some ways that we can make these things happen that may be a little bit non-traditional. And we'll get into the Q&A. So the question we come up with is, why should the typical American, worried about holding on to their job, providing for their family, and millions of mundane challenges, get invested in protecting the environment? As we think about that question, that's on the minds of the American people, because after decades of scientific evidence, nearly half of Americans in a recent Pew Research poll said they didn't view climate change as a major threat. And 56% said they thought they were already doing enough. Maybe we're using recycling, maybe we're composting, we're doing enough. Maybe we're doing too much to reduce the effects of climate change. So we have to ask the question, climate issues are often framed as a choice between jobs and the planet. And it's a false choice. You can do both. So first, the foundation of making sure we all understand this would be greenhouse gas and their lifetimes. When we look at carbon dioxide, that's the one that we have the most impact. It's almost 80% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And it has a GWP, a global warming potential of 1. It's kind of like a benchmark. And then we have methane that you see here. Over the first 12 years, it's like 85 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. But it dissipates. Unlike carbon dioxide, it lasts hundreds and hundreds of years. So whatever we did in 1970 in terms of emissions, it's still up there, and it will be up there for a long, long time. And then we have things like nitrogen dioxide, which lasts 120 years, and then we have fluorinated gases. These things last, as much as 25,000 years. It's pretty serious stuff. And even though the one of these that I've listed here seems to be the least powerful, there's so much of it. It's the major thing. And when we solve that problem, we're solving a lot of the other ones as well. All right. So let's see. All right. So the other thing, besides how long they last, is we need to think about what we've emitted already. So we look at the analogy of a bathtub. And as we fill up the bathtub, that's kind of like what's happened to the emissions. So you can see in the bottom right-hand part of the slide, you can see emissions have gone up since 1960 on up to over 420 parts per million. Okay, so two things are important here. One, how much is already there and how much we're adding every single day. In fact, when we look at it, we're spewing about 162 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the thin shell of our atmosphere every day as if it were an open sewer. Now, the first thing to know is what's a metric ton, because that's a measure of emissions. That's, and a metric ton is 2,200 pounds. So it's a little bit bigger than a U.S. ton, but it's what's commonly used. And so when we look at this, we see that a 27-foot high, 27-foot wide, 27-foot deep cube is what 1 metric ton looks like. So it's like a 2-story house. With that said, our emissions on a global basis, which this chart is showing, you can see here, it's gone from 1970, about 27, 28 gigatons. Now, the gigaton is such a huge number that a lot of people can't grasp this, but 51 gigatons is 51 billion tons of carbon, or 112.2 trillion pounds. So needless to say, it's huge, and that's what's happening today. And the projection in blue indicates what's happening as we go forward in time here. So with that said, let's take a look at the USA. USA is doing a little bit better. Since 2007, we've actually reduced our emissions, which is good. So we're down to about 5.6 metric tons. And you can see the little dip there, that's COVID. So that's good. Unfortunately, policy says our current policy in blue there would indicate 3 different projections as to where we'll be by 2030 in 6 years. And you can see if we add the IRA, which is the climate bill that was approved, I think, in 2022, you can see that brings it down a little better. And the long-term impact of the IRA is really beyond 2030 out in time, its impact. That's all good news. The trouble is the Paris Agreement in 2015 said we're going to cut emissions in half by 2030. Okay, so we have to say, oh, cut it in half. Well, wait a minute. The Paris Agreement says we should be at about 3.1 gigatons. And we're not. We're not close. So now what are we going to do? Because 21 out of the 22 hottest years on record have been since 2002. Pretty serious stuff. And the hottest of all have been in the last 9 years. And scientists say that 2023 is likely to be added to the list here. So in this chart, on the left side of the chart, you can see billion-dollar severe storms over time. Now, these are facts that I'm giving you here. This is not, some type of, estimate. These are facts on the billion-dollar storms and the rising seas and the more flooding that is happening in the, ocean flooding and all of that kind of thing. And so as we look at this slide, though, on the left-hand side, you can see what the EPA says the emissions are in terms of transportation, about 28%, electric, about 25%, electricity, industry, about 23%, commercial and residential, about 13%, and agriculture, 10%. Now, to really get meaning out of this, we got to say, let's distribute the electricity to the areas where the electricity is used. And that would be the pie chart on the right side. It would show the commercial and residential would rise from 13 to about 30. Industry would be about 30, and transportation would be about the same because we don't have that many EVs yet, for example. So with that said, energy-related CO2 emissions kind of looks like this. 19% from coal. That's a picture of the Prairie State Energy Campus where Naperville gets massive amounts of energy from, electricity. In fact, I think coal is about close to 80%. It's bad. It's really bad. And I think Green Bay, Wisconsin's about the only city that I know that's close to Naperville. So now we don't see that here because it's Marissa, Illinois, in southern Illinois. But that's where the pollution is happening, and it's affecting greenhouse gases all over the country. The next one would be oil, 46%. And from an oil point of view, we're talking about oil that's used to make plastics. I think it's about 8% plastics. And then we have gasoline. And then on the right would be natural gas, 35%. Now, the Three Rivers Energy Center in Morris, Illinois, that's pretty new. It's actually pretty new. And in fact, they're trying to build 200 more of those gas plants. You got to move away from that. In fact, all of it's got to go with coal, the most important thing to go immediately. And then oil and natural gas is next. Now, why is this still happening? We look at this, and we look at this picture on the left. We say, well, it's because of fossil fuels. We subsidize them. There's all kinds of reasons why this is happening. But the way the world was 10 or 20 years ago is not the world we're in today. Since the IRA and since technology improvements have happened, the solutions to this are different today. And in fact, it's still happening because we keep buying gasoline. We keep buying methane gases. Some people like to call it natural gas. I won't do that in this presentation. It's not natural. It's methane. In fact, it's about 88% methane. And we know, I told you in the beginning, what methane was like in terms of its power. Okay, we keep buying fossil fuel electricity from Prairie State, coal plants, from natural gas plants. Perhaps we didn't know that we could change, or perhaps we didn't know about incentives to help us change, like the IRA. Or perhaps we didn't know about the total cost of ownership. Even if an EV costs a little more than an ICE car, for example, it's so much less to charge it and to maintain it. We have to look at the total budget impact of whatever we do, and not just an EV, but other things. So then there's this issue of perhaps we're afraid to change. Even when we know we should change, sometimes it's hard to do it because change is always scary. So the key metric or a message that I want to send out here is we need to stop burning things. Doesn't matter what it is, but especially fossil fuels, we need to stop burning them, period. So moving ahead, wait a minute, I'm just one person. Can I change the world? Well, individually, we are each contributing 22 metric tons, about 48,500 pounds of carbon. Now, maybe some of you aren't, but in fact, the higher your income, the more you can double that number and triple that number, because that's a fact. So individually, we can make a difference. But what's important is what we do individually, the micro, influences community, what they call the macro. So our contributions have legs. When we buy something, we are voting with our wallets. And there's number 3. The ripple effect is strong. We're social creatures. When we do, we learn. When we learn, we gain capability and knowledge and credibility with other people. And when we share this, we set an example on how we can help others. We can actually help them because we've done it, right? So the ripple effect is strong. The trouble is, we're in such trouble right now. That ripple effect needs to be big waves. It's got to be really fast, and it's got to be hard, or else. So there's 3, I collect thoughts of the day. Anybody who wants to be on my distribution list, some of you may be. I send them out every week or sometimes twice a week. Mother Teresa says, I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast the stone across the waters to create ripples, many ripples. Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only way it's ever happened. And then finally, Jim Rohn says, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. They influence you, you influence them. So this is about personally doing it and then helping others see that you did it. And that's how it spreads like wildfire. All right. So what should we do? Oh my God. You look at this. Yeah, this is from a great organization, Project Drawdown. And there are 96 solutions. And they're all good ones. I've looked at them. But what does that apply to Naperville or Aurora or Oak Park or wherever you live? Is that what applies? No, I don't think so. People ought to be working on that. But then, wait a minute. Should we deal with this thing called a carbon footprint? Well, Dr. Leah Stokes says, should we plant more trees? Absolutely. Should we bike more and drive less? Maybe we should have smaller cars. Absolutely. Should we reduce less single-use plastics? Of course. Should we eat less meat, especially beef? Sure. All these things are great and they're important. But you know what? There's a hierarchy of the things that have the most impact. And that's what we want to talk about today. The solution that can have the most impact, according to Rewiring America and Dr. Leah Stokes, is electrification. That's what we're going to talk about today. 75% of the problem that I outlined earlier can be helped with electrification. Clean electricity, clean transportation, clean electrified buildings, and electrified industry. Now, there's some things in industry like cement and, steel making that's very hard to do. And they're working on that. Keep working on it. It's not something I can do. Agriculture, wicked important. Those of you that are interested in agriculture, please join Climate Reality, join the regenerative agriculture team that we have. It works in the Farm Bill and other things. It's very important, not just for its 10% of emissions, but what it can absorb from other. That's the way to do real carbon capture, not some of the things that people are talking about. So with that said, we can control it. And the old way we do things is like this. Oil is refined into diesel and gasoline. It feeds 253 million personal vehicles in the United States and about another 30 million trucks. and buses. And that added together is about 25% of the 29% or 29% of transportation emissions. Believe it or not, jet planes are huge emitters, but there isn't near as many of them as there are cars. And each car is 5 metric tons. So when we think about it, we have to look at impact of what we can do and how we can spread this. Now, the other way to look at it is buildings. About 50%. And we start at the bottom, we say coal is used to create electricity. Wind and solar and hydro, and I should have nuclear up there, but I forgot. Sorry. That generates electricity. And methane gas is used to generate electricity. In fact, methane gas is being preferred now over coal, as coal plants are shutting down across the nation. And what this methane gas and electricity feed, 120 million gas stoves, 19 million methane gas clothes dryers, 123 million methane gas water heaters, and 117 million gas space heaters. That's why we have an emissions problem, because of things we're doing. So I'm not trying to let the fossil fuel industry off the hook at all. I'm just trying to say one way to change them is for us to stop buying their stuff. Okay, so moving right along, we circle the bottom of this page. We have to X out coal immediately in red. The other things have to be X'd out over the next decade or two. Quickly as people can do it. Because this is the new way. The new way is solar, wind, and batteries, and hydro, and carefully selected green hydrogen, made only from renewable sources, only in selected areas. Clean electricity feeds 117 million heat pumps, which are also cool. They feed 123 million heat pump water heaters, 19 million heat pump clothes dryers, 120 million electric induction stoves. That's what we need to do, and that's how we can get to 75%. If everybody did this, we'd be fine. And fossil fuel industry would go out of business. But it's not going to happen that easy. We're going to have to chip at it. We're going to have to start doing it ourselves and spreading it like wildfire to everybody that we can talk to. All right, where are we? In the dark gray, those are the fossil fuel machines, and the yellow would be the efficient electric machines. And you can see in terms of furnaces, we're only partway there. It's mostly bad stuff. Natural gas furnaces. Water heaters, it's almost nowhere. It's like people don't even know they exist. Well, they're really just starting to get popular right now, and they work, and they're very cost effective. And then we have cooking. Fortunately, a lot of the country is on electric stoves already. So if we electrify, they're already electrified. Now, an electric stove is it's not as good as an induction stove in terms of efficiency, an electric induction stove. So that's where we want to go. But the priority is not to get rid of an electric stove. The priority is to get rid of a gas stove. That's the priority. And then finally, cars. You can see that small little bit up there of electric vehicles. The rest of it's all gas, internal combustion engine vehicles. So with that said, the top 3 emission areas to get us to 2030, which means we got to cut emissions in half, and then net zero by 2050. That's the goal. Solar, which is the foundation for everything we do, because we electrify, right? We want to do it on a clean grid. And what's the chance that our grids are going to be clean fast enough? Very low. So you can do what I did. You can go solar. And 98% of my power, it comes from my roof. 2% comes from the Naperville electric utility. 3 years ago, I essentially fired them. And that's because I couldn't stand what I saw about what they were doing with coal. And they weren't going to move fast enough. So we should advocate for them to move faster. However, it's not enough. There's things we can do right now. And what better way to encourage people to do the right things but to cast the stone across and get people moving now. Electric vehicles, 100% by 2035. If not, we don't stand a chance by 2050. We're going to be net zero. That means effectively we have zero emissions in 2050. Well, car lasts 12, 15 years. So we got to stop buying gas-powered cars by around 2035, pretty quickly. Same thing with heat pumps. We have to go 3 times the rate by 2032, and we must achieve this for our families and for our budgets. We need to sidestep the fossil fuel industry. So with that said, let's take each one of the three things and dive in a little bit. First is solar. It's the foundation for everything. It reduces the emissions and reduces our medium and long-term costs. So this is coal. This is the trend for coal that you see over time. Here's the trend for natural gas. Much cheaper, much cheaper. Generally thought to be half the emissions, right? Generally thought, which isn't good because half isn't good enough, right? But then nuclear, the most expensive. And 54% of Illinois is on nuclear power. 54%. It's not going to cut it, right? Because it's expensive and it's being subsidized. All right. And then we have wind, just as cheap as natural gas now. And we have solar. It used to be very expensive not long ago. So we have wind and solar tied with natural gas. Bye-bye natural gas. So the good news is 85% of new capacity that's being brought online is clean energy. After that, solar, 25% wind, 11% battery storage to work both of those together, industrial strength batteries, and then natural gas, 15%. As I said, they're still building natural gas power plants, which has to go. All right, so rooftop solar. The picture in the top left represents the type of world that we need to get to. If you have a roof and sun hits the roof, why aren't you generating power from that? The sun is the most powerful source of electricity, of energy, the most powerful. So why are we letting it hit our roofs just to heat our home? Why are we not letting it heat solar panels? In Australia, 1 out of every 3 homes has panels on the roof, and in southern Australia, it's 1 out of every 2. We can do it. Now, if you can't do it, and you can see the benefits there, savings can be as much as 90%. I'll show you that in a second. Community solar is the way to go. You don't have a big roof. You're in a 5-story apartment building. You don't control the roof. You can advocate for it, but the roof might not be big enough. So you sign up for community solar, which is a solar farm, and you buy power from them. It's clean. The benefits will be 15 to 20%. You won't save as much money as rooftop, but it's a way to get clean quick, and it's easy by just signing up. There's almost no investment. So that's the deal with solar. And my estimate of emissions, as you can see here, is about 4.6 metric tons. That's almost 5 houses of CO2 per year. You can cut it down by about 90% down to 0.46. Now, it depends on your roof and the panels you pick. Of course, I'm getting 98%. Okay, but you may not have a roof big enough. So you may need solar panels and community solar to get it to be green. And many people I know do that. Now, the EIA, Energy Information Agency, says the average home is 3.5 metric tons. So whether you believe me or the EIA, my numbers are Illinois, and they're my calculations. Be glad to work with anybody on the details of that. It's big. That's the main thing. It's big, and it can be much smaller really fast. All right. Now, I was glad that Kathy Clarkin shared this slide with me as an example of solar. Yeah. Can we take the questions at the end? Yeah, put it in the chat. All right. So we have the solar scenario. Now, the average home that's on solar in Illinois is often small homes that could be $12,000, $15,000 in investment, total investment. But many larger homes, 2-story homes, as in the picture, would be, say, $30,000. Now, with the power of a 10,000 watt system for a typical 2-story home would be about $30,000 to buy the thing. Could be less, but based on that, it would be $9,000 from the federal government, $3,000 from the city of Naperville, and about $10,000 from the state of Illinois. So something like that. If you had a smaller system, the numbers would be proportionally less. Okay, so there is an investment that you have. Could be 5 to 6 or 7 year investment. Now, my daughter up in Wisconsin, Madison, she can't afford solar panels, but she has them. And the panels are being paid for by the panels. Her electric bill went near zero. And the money that she would have spent there goes to pay for the panels. In 5 or 6 years, she will own those panels and it will be sheer profit. Okay. What about my situation, my home? This is I'm using myself as a case here. The projection was that I would, over 3 years, I would save $3,476. I did the math the other day. I saved about $3,200. So it's pretty close. That's over $1,000 a year that I've saved. 98% of my emissions are covered by my roof, 2% from the city of Naperville electric department. I saved 27 tons of emissions, 27 houses, 59,508 pounds, just to get an idea. And I already told you what a metric ton is, right? It's like a house. And it's equal to 60,000 miles not traveled. So we should travel less, have EVs, maybe smaller EVs, but if you're going to do a car, electric car, right? And then we have 2,728 gallons of gas, 404 trees. So plant as many trees as you can. But I did the equivalent of 404 trees in my yard. That's pretty good. I could never plant that many. And those 404 trees, it's 10 years of their scrubbing of emissions. All right, so let's move to cars. Reduce emissions, reduce costs, optimize with solar. Having an EV on the city of Naperville charging is beneficial. But on solar, it's wickedly beneficial. So with that said, here's some pictures of cars, just for reference. You can get the slides when I'm done. We'll send out the PDF to Kathy, and she can send them out to you. But here's some examples. Top left, Chevy Bolt, $26,500. It does qualify for the tax credit, so you get a brand new car for about $20,000. And if you lucked out and got the Illinois $4,000 tax rebate, which is hard to do, by the way, because they don't budget that well, you could be down about $16,000 for a new car. Now, if you prefer the Tesla Model 3 in the top right, $38,000 subtract $7,500, it gets it, and you're down to about $30,000 for a brand new Tesla. Now, of course, they have all-wheel drive versions of these cars and more sophisticated ones, but these are pretty well equipped. And in fact, the one in the center, the Kia EV6, top rated in Consumer Reports, $38,000, and there's a few models above that to about 40, 45, that kind of thing. Now, the price of all cars in the USA today averages $48,000. So if you go out and look at EVs and a lot today, you're a little bit the price. Okay, remember, all cars are become more expensive. They just are. However, EV prices in 1 year have dropped $11,624 on average. That's 20% that dropped. So whatever you did a year ago about an EV, try it now. And according to Cox Automotive, because they're dropping because there's real competition. It isn't owned by Tesla anymore. In fact, Tesla's experience the need to cut their costs pretty dramatically because there's so many others out there now. And this, I'm sorry to say, I can't go into this, except to say all the cars on the left are below the average cost of a car. And all the ones on the right are EVs that cost more than the average cost of a car. So my purpose in showing this is just for reference. Moving right along, 28% of transportation emissions, of that, 59% are your cars. 25%, 24%, trucks and buses, about 10% for aircraft, etc. So you can make a difference. Your car really does matter. And in fact, it's about just say round numbers, 5 metric tons, 5 houses a year of carbon. You can bring it down on the average energy grid to 2. You can cut 3 metric tons and go to 2, or on solar you can drop to about 0.63 metric tons. And that would be the time that you have to charge when the sun isn't shining. And it also would be to make the battery. There are emissions to make the battery. But you have to take the metrics of the battery emissions and prorate it, because make the battery and then prorate it over 15 years. That's the impact. Okay, moving right along. Some people say, well, should I go to a hybrid car instead? Aren't they better? They are. So when we look at this chart here, you can see that according to the government, an average new gasoline vehicle is 400 grams of CO2 per mile. Okay. And with that, 81 grams per mile would be upstream emissions. That would be emissions to get the oil out of the ground, refine the oil, turn it into gasoline, send the gasoline to the gas station. Okay, we have to count that, right? And then 319 grams would be what goes out the tailpipe. Hybrids, almost half that, as you can see, 40 versus 179. It's better. And the plug-in hybrids, even a little bit better, 60 versus 99. And an EV on a mixed energy grid is 109, still better. And on solar panels, it's less than 50 because you charge sometimes when the sun's not out. So you're taking it from the grid, and I'm counting that, and I'm also counting the battery. Okay. Maybe you want to compare two cars. So the top right link is the fuel economy. It's a way to tell whether an EV or a car EV you're thinking of buying can qualify for the tax credit. So that's important if you want a tax credit. On the left is the simulation that they'll run. I plugged in a Chevy Bolt and a similar car, the Chevy Equinox gas car. And you can see pictures of it there. And the Bolt would be 2372 pounds of emissions per year versus the emissions of the Equinox, 10,601. And then you can see the costs for the Bolt would be 21 cents a mile versus 32, $452 a year versus $1,586 per year, and operating costs $25.57 versus $38.43. This is the kind of math you should do before you decide that EVs are too expensive. It's just a suggestion, okay? And why is this? How can EVs even do this? Well, an EV has a motor, which is a very simple thing. And you can see the picture of the motor on the left-hand side of the screen. It's rotating energy. There's no need for a conventional transmission. You go forward and backwards. That's all it is. You want to go faster? The motor goes faster. On the right side is the internal combustion engine, converting the vertical energy into rotating energy with the camshaft and polluting not only carbon monoxide, but carbon dioxide. Okay. So on the right, it's about 22% efficient. On the left, it's about 80 to 85% efficient. And EVs can actually take energy and put it back into the battery every time you slow down. Okay. The vehicle timeline. The yellow area represents what we have to do with EVs to 2050. All vehicles have to be zero-emission vehicles by 2050. Now, what you can see here is the red line, and the lines that you see in colors above that are the gas vehicles that have to go. They have to go by 2050. So you have a choice. Do you believe in net zero by 2050 or not? If you believe that, they got to go because they're not going to get any better. EVs will get better, but they won't get better. So with that said, if we push that to the right and look on the left, that means with a 12, 15-year life, most cars hitting the road have to be EVs by about 2035. They just have to. So with that said, can it be done? Well, as you can see here, we have countries all around the world like Norway. They're already at 85%. Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, they're all there. Some of the coldest places on Earth. Do EVs work in cold weather? Absolutely they do. And they're the most popular in the cold climates, by the way. Anyway, where is the United States? We're at the bottom. I hope you can see it. 6% in 2021, and we're 9% now, which means now we're like Italy was 2 years ago. Now, this hope, California is already at 25%, and all these states, 16 of them agreed to be 100% EVs by 2035, some before 2035. Now, about half of these states have it driven or inculcated into their actual legislation. It's the law. It has to happen. So we're hoping to get this done. It's called ACC2, Advanced Clean Cars, and there's a truck version called ACT, Advanced Clean Trucks, to do a similar thing. So are we going to have enough batteries and stuff? Well, look at the investment. I know it's hard to see, but you can see the grid, 32 EV and battery plants being created around the country right now as we speak. And there's about a $17 billion investment from the IRA to make that happen. Are we going to have bumps in the road with lithium shortages and stuff? Yes. Will we overcome it? Yes. Because markets create demand and demand gets stuff done. Okay. So where are you, Illinois? We're not on here. We got to be on here. Now the governor's considering it, but we got to be on here now. Now, the tax credit for EVs, if you don't know, oh, sorry. For new EVs would be $7,500 maximum. For cars, car can't be more than $55,000. SUVs, pickups, and vans can't be more than $80,000 MSRP.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, sorry about that. So you can see with the EV tax credit now, the good thing that's happening is some vehicles are $7,500 like the Bolt, but for example, the Mustang Mach-E is $3,750 because Ford doesn't have the composition of the battery materials to qualify for the full amount. So if you buy one of them, you're going to get less of a tax credit. Okay. Now, some good things are happening on 1/1/24 coming right up is the tax credit will be available right at the dealer, right off the top. You'll take it right off the MSRP. So that's going to be fantastically helpful. The other thing is it's going to be refundable, which means it's like a rebate. So suppose you have low income, you only pay, I don't know, $2,000 a year in taxes. We claim the whole $7,500, and that is going to be a real boon. So should you wait to buy an EV? I tend to think in 2024, unless something happens with the economy, it's going to be high demand because of things like this. So I would get one now if you could, but consider this. All right. All right. So the maximum used vehicle would be used vehicles can't be more than 25,000. 30% tax credit up to $4,000, and it has similar rules in terms of income limitations, only they're just different numbers, like maximum 150,000 and on down. All right. Let's go on to homes, which is still kind of the last step in this. You can see a breakdown by the pie chart on heating being 29% of home energy use, cooling 17%, water heating, and appliances. So if we attack this from an emissions point of view, heat pumps can do space heating and cooling, water heating and clothes drying, and induction stoves don't reduce that many emissions except for poison emissions in your home, which is really bad. So the impetus to do an induction stove isn't greenhouse gases. It is slightly better, but not a whole lot better. The impetus and the reason why we did an induction stove is because of poisons in the kitchen, which is significant, by the way. So this is what a heat pump looks like. On the right is what you would have in your basement instead of the gas heater. The left would be instead of the air conditioner, and that would be the condenser. And they work as a team. And the way this works, it's a little hard to explain. I'll just say heat pumps move heat from your house outside like an air conditioner, or heat will take heat outside and move it inside when you need heat. And believe it or not, even at like 20, 25 degrees, this heat. And when the compressor compresses the refrigerant gets really hot. And when it goes in to the grid within your home and air blows over it, it's hot and heats the home. Now, this is a heat pump, how heat pump heats your home. And I'll just include this, but for sake of time, I want to skip ahead right here. All right, so heat pumps are now outselling gas heating systems, which is really good news. They've been tied for the last few years, but now they exceed that. And the emissions reduction would be almost 7 metric tons down to 3.51, still on the grid. And then on solar panels, about 2.07. That would be the reduction. Now, the Energy Information Agency disagrees slightly with me. They say it's 5.21. Whether you believe them on a national basis or me picking Illinois, it's big. Let me just say that it's big, and the reduction is significant. Okay, with that said, heat pumps work. Heat pumps for water heating work the same, except when the refrigerant is compressed in the top section that you see there. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll just point to it. I guess my pointer doesn't work, sorry. But in the little box up at the top here, when the refrigerant is compressed, it gets wicked hot. And when it gets wicked hot, it goes through the coils down into the cold water, heats up the water without burning anything, and then the hot water goes out into your home. All right. Again, a similar type of reduction, 2.23 metric tons down to about 1.2, down to about 0.67 on solar. Now, the electrified appliances look like this. On the left, we have the heat pump clothes dryer, and this is one $900 at Best Buy that you can get tomorrow. And they don't require any outside installation of, like ventilation or anything like a gas or an electric dryer would use, because they have a completely different way to take moisture and heat out of the clothes, which means that they can heat the clothes, get the moisture out at a much lower temperature, which is allegedly much better for the clothes. On the right is the induction stove. That's one there you can get at Home Depot for $10.98. Mine costs $1,300. They used to be $4,000. Like anything else, prices are dropping fast for these types of appliances. So I recommend you take a look now. If you looked in the past, there are very competitive stoves available to you. And the great thing about it is no carbon monoxide, no nitrogen dioxide in the home, no particulate matter. And you know what? If you Google, you can see an amazing number of fires in the United States are started because of gas leaks. And many of them result in explosions, like the house that blew up in Lisle recently. Okay, you don't want gas in your house. In my opinion, you should consider that it's about safety as well, this gas. With that said, the timeline for these heat products like heating, heat pumps and things like that is similar. In this case, we're trying to get rid of oil that heats a lot of homes, especially in the Northeast, electric resistance heaters that are very inefficient in much of the world that use that, and then gas heaters in yellow, which you can see in the picture here. And what we want by 2050 to be electric heat pumps should be taking over by just before 2050. And the picture on the left simply says, with the time offset of these appliances, again, it's about 15 years or so when we have to stop buying those things. All right. With that said, what are the incentives for this? So the incentives would be for the heat pump. If you are low income, and that could be defined on this website link that you see here. If you are low income, 100% up to $8,000 you can apply for to get a heat pump. Now, if the heat pump costs $12,000, you're going to have to pay the difference. But the first $8,000, if you're middle income, it's 50% that you can qualify for the rebate. And the bottom of the page would be, you don't qualify in either cases, you can get a tax credit of 30% up to $2,000. So that's the heat pump. Now, the the heat pump water heater is $1,750, and it's the same kind of rules, and the tax rate is the same at the bottom. And the induction stove is $840. There's only a rebate. There is no tax credit for the heat pump, at least right now. So there's tremendous incentive since the IRA was passed in 2022 to do these things. Now, most of the rebates start next year. So it's all brand new. So that's good to consider. And I know this may be hard to see, but this is simply a listing of all the things that you can get tax credits for. For example, one of the ones that I highlighted is the electric panel, right? I didn't have to upgrade my panel for my EV or my stove, but if I do the water heater, I'm going to have to, okay? So you can see that could be up to $4,000, which may be just enough money for my panel, okay, to upgrade my panel. So all of them are listed here, and they're at that link that's on the screen right here. It's very easy to use. So if we take all the things that I've talked about tonight and we stack them in a bar, you see the left bar set of bars would be before the transition, but still on the grid. So the electricity is 4.6 metric tons, as I said to you. On top of that is 5 for the car. On top of that is 6.89 for the heating and air conditioning system. And on top of that is 2.23 for the water heater. Altogether, that's 18, almost 19 metric tons out of about 22 metric tons you're probably emitting right now, unless you're doing some of these things, right? Now, suppose you go on solar. Well, if you transition these items, but you don't go on, I'm sorry, the second set of bars is if you don't go on solar, but do all these things, it'll drop it dramatically. But the bar on the right is the impact if you do these things on solar. Look at that. So by all means, do all these things, but do them on solar because you want to get rid of the emissions, the 25% emissions associated with electricity. So with that said, you can see going from the left, the grid, to all these things still on the grid is a 40% reduction in emissions. Taking that over to the right would be another 66% of emissions reduction, or going from the top and doing all these things would be a 66% emissions, or 14.92 metric tons. Okay, I hope this is clear. In this grid, hopefully you can see this. If not, you can take a look at this in the PDF that I'll send out. It shows you the emissions characteristics, and it projects from Rewiring America the dollars saved. So in the first row, if you can see it up there, it projects the 90% emissions reduction, 4.1 metric tons or 9127 pounds. It says if you go on solar, you're going to save $1,100 a year. That's what Rewiring America is saying, about $1,100. Could be a little less or a little bit more. The zero emission electric vehicle, tremendous reduction in emissions, especially on solar. You'll get another $1,100. But actually, you'll get more than that because not only doing the EV is $1,100, but EV on solar is almost free electricity. So it's actually higher, but they don't give you that. So each row in red is the row for that row only of what they're projecting the savings to be. And on the right side is simply a 20-year expansion of what that is. So take a look at that. So it's really our choice to sum this up. We can keep what's going on the left in the picture. The smokestacks, the houses with no panels on the roof, the gasoline-powered cars in the yard, which may be hard to see. Or we can do what's on the right. Go ahead and put the panels on the roof. Don't waste the sun's power. Get the electric vehicle, plug it in, and do all those other things that I talked about in the home. So with that said, at Climate Reality, we're asking people to pledge. And I'm just simply putting it up here as a suggestion. You can take the pledge if you want to by going to the website that will be on some of the next page, or create your own at Nest if you want to. Our pledge looks like this. As my home and appliances and vehicles reach the end of their useful life, I pledge to be ready to replace them with electric alternatives and to encourage my family, friends, and community to do the same. There's no pressure that says, get rid of your gas car tomorrow. If you got 2 more years of payments and you want to let that run out and then consider electric car, by all means, that's a good idea. If you want to get rid of the gas car sooner, fine. But that's what you would do. But I wanted to underline I pledge to be ready. If your water heater breaks and there's a flood in your basement, or it stops, you're going to have water, right? Hot water. Don't wait until that happens, because you'll call up your contractor and he'll say, oh, geez, we don't do. And then you'll go into a search pattern as to who will do a heat pump water heater. And that's part of what Climate Reality is trying to establish in conjunction with Nest and other organizations, as who are the enlightened contractors to help us do these things. So you would be ready, such as, I'll point out one of our campaign's leader, Pam Tate, in Climate Reality. She's already got her garage wired, and it's ready to go for electric. But she's not going, I believe she said, she's not going electric for another couple of years. She's got a Prius, it's fine for now, but she's planning for that. So that's what everybody needs to do, plan for this. And there's not a whole lot of things to plan. Now, if you're an activist, the green part applies. I will encourage my municipal elected officials and staff to provide information on federal, state, and local incentives on their website and community events. I will support businesses, institutions, churches, libraries, and the benefits on the benefits and incentives for electrification. So that would be, you could do the top and feel good about what you've done. You created a little bit of a ripple. You're talking to your friends and so forth about what you did. But if you want to extend it to the bottom, that's a really good thing. So I'm saying, please join us with the electrification pledge. Consider it. And then there would be a suggested to-do list. It would say, list your top fossil fuel machines in your house, in your car. Take a list and take a look at how old they are. If you've got a water heater that's 10 years old, I think statistically it's about to die. You might want to say, wait a minute, this is about to die. Some of these other things are a lot newer. I should be ready for it to die, okay? And kind of like prepare for that. So make a list in number one. How old are the machines and what's the life expectancy? We're only talking about what, 6 machines? That's all. It's pretty easy to do this. How old are the machines and what's the life expectancy? We can tell you, or you can Google that up. Sequence the list by items closest to their end of life as possible priority. And then what's the most important thing you can do? I would say the likely thing is solar. And if you can't do solar, one of the things I mentioned is community solar earlier, right? Just sign up for that, cut your costs 15 to 20%, and you're cutting your emissions dramatically. And then decide the next most important thing to do. Maybe it's the car, zero emission vehicle. Is a hybrid good enough? I showed it to you. It's lots better. But doing that now is probably not a good idea. If you did it already, that's great. But when you get the new one, probably it's better to go with an EV. And we can talk more about that. Prepare on 1/1 for the higher demand for EVs. It might be harder to get them on 1/1, by the way, because of the incentives that I talked to you about. And then what else? Enlighten contractors lists. We're doing a lot of things to prepare for the future. We'd love to work with the Nest people on what those things are and how we can work together to have good lists. And that's about it. There's some links. Dr. Leah Stokes is the first link. 20-minute video that covers a lot of what I covered. She's great. Do it. Rewiring America. They're a climate reality website and the footprint calculator. And that's it. Thank you.